Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Miller, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of MIDAO, which stands for Marshall Islands DAO. MIDAO is the company that's created the best legal entity in the world made for Web3 and DAOs. So DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, but that really makes it sound a little more complicated than it is. To me, a DAO is any organization that uses the blockchain for one or more of these three things: tracking its membership, doing its governance, i.e. usually voting, and managing its treasury, or sometimes a protocol. By doing these things on chain, not only are you getting access to transparency, guaranteed compliance, but it allows you to start an organization as easily as you can start a website or launch a website, and scale an organization as fast as you can scale a website on the cloud. And so for the first time in human history, we have a way of organizing ourselves and our resources with so much less friction that you can do things in 1 week that previously were not even possible to do in 6 months. The reason DAOs are going to change the world is organizing ourselves is one of the key elements of humanity. If you look at what researchers and academics talk about as what makes humans different from other species, it's not that we're necessarily faster and stronger or even smarter, or maybe we're one of the smartest. It's the way we socialize and collaborate and organize. And so when you introduce a new technology or a new approach to organizing people, that has the ability to completely transform life on Earth. Now, introduce things like AI and autonomous agents, the fact that with DAOs, you could effectively have members that are computers, that just takes it to another level. But even without that, enabling a new form of human organization that's so much more transparent and compliant, can scale much more globally, that is extremely powerful. We started MIDAO, let me go back to the beginning. About 3 years ago, I was personally working for a DAO, building software, and the DAO was offered $1 million grant from the Moonbeam Ecosystem Fund. And that fund said, to accept this $1 million grant, you have to sign this grant agreement, which means you need a legal entity for your DAO. And so we looked around the world. We looked at common options like Delaware, Switzerland, Cayman Islands, and came to the realization that literally every single legal entity in the world requires you to do certain things that we don't believe any DAO or most DAOs are going to want to do. So that includes things like requiring DAOs to have some kind of management team, a board, directors, officers, trustees, managers, whatever. A lot of DAOs don't want to have managers, at least in the long run. Additionally, every legal entity in the world until recently required companies to know the names and physical addresses of all of their members. And we again felt like our DAO and no other DAO, at least many DAOs, want to be able to have anonymous members. And so because of these two issues, we reached out to a senator in the Marshall Islands. Now, the Marshall Islands is a former US territory, but a sovereign nation in the South Pacific that has long been one of the most popular jurisdictions in the shipping industry. So there are something like 40 or 50 publicly traded companies on the New York Stock Exchange that are Marshall Islands companies. So we reached out to the Marshall Islands senator and said, hey, in some ways, DAOs are kind of like ships. They don't live in any one place. They're kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So how would you like to expand your country's expertise from shipping into Web3 and DAOs? That's led to the writing and passing of 3 laws in the Marshall Islands that have created a nonprofit and for-profit DAO LLC, a legal entity that's made for Web3 and DAOs. And we started the company MIDAO, which again stands for Marshall Islands DAO. It's a partnership between the government of the Marshall Islands and our private company. And this partnership is the registered agent that can create and maintain these DAO LLCs for people. Our job is to promote this around the world. And then when someone, whether it's an ICP ecosystem or otherwise, decides they want to create a legal entity for their DAO or Web3 project, they can reach out to us and we can help facilitate with template documents, etc., to get them registered in the Marshall Islands. So a lot of people ask me, what is the risk of having an unregistered DAO? So what if you don't form a legal entity anywhere? And actually, that's become extremely clear over the past several months as DAOs that are unregistered have ended up in court cases in the United States, at least, where the judge has said specifically, and this is what lawyers would have told you for the last 10 years, any group of people that's engaged in a common enterprise, and so that includes DAOs, that is not registered with the government as some kind of legal entity, gets a default treatment according to the law, and that default treatment treatment is called a general partnership. What happens with a general partnership is that every single member of the DAO can be held liable for the entire DAO's activity. If anything goes wrong with your DAO, every single person involved in the DAO can have their home taken away, their car taken away. I mean, literally, you can be completely held liable for the entire DAO. Now, beyond that, there's also a tax liability. So let's say that DAO has 100 members, each with 1% of the ownership or voting rights in the DAO and no legal entity. From the IRS's perspective, and also from the perspective of tax institutions around the world, if that DAO makes money in a given year, each person is responsible for paying taxes on 1% of that DAO's earnings, irrespective of whether that person saw any of that money. So you've got the legal liability, you've got the tax liability, and going back to the reason I mentioned we started MIDAO in the first place, a DAO without a legal entity cannot enter into agreements with other organizations or people. And that means you can't hire an employee. You can't enter into a contract to rent a space at an event. You can't rent an Airbnb. You can't open a bank account. There's all these things you cannot do unless you have a legal entity beyond the legal and tax liability inherent in operating a DAO without a legal entity. So you might wonder how the Marshall Islands DAO LLC compares to other options from around the world. So there's the two key benefits I mentioned earlier, right? That with the DAO LLC, you don't have to have any kind of management team. So you can be truly decentralized and you can have fully anonymous membership. So people can be members simply by holding your governance or membership token. But the benefits do go beyond that. So for example, the cost is much lower than places like the Cayman Islands. And the reason for that is that in the Cayman Islands, anyone is required to hire on an ongoing basis a local law firm and an independent director, a person that you pay to sit on your board, which again, I think it's crazy that DAOs even would want to have a board in the first place, but a lot of DAOs do, believe it or not. And so you end up with these massive initial and ongoing expenses, and MIDAO doesn't have those two requirements. There's also clear securities treatment. So in the DAO Act in the Marshall Islands, it very specifically says situations where a governance token is not a security. And so that can help you, for example, let's say you want to get your token listed on a centralized exchange. One of the first questions they will ask you is your token a security in the local jurisdiction where your DAO is registered? Additionally, you have a better record keeping requirement. So in a lot of jurisdictions, you have to do all these annual documentation, resolutions, all this stuff. In the Marshall Islands, the law, the DAO Act says, as long as you are keeping all of your records on the blockchain and that they can be converted into human readable format, you don't have to keep your records anywhere else. The list goes on. You know, what we've done is we've really collected input over the past few years from lawyers all over the world that work in this business and said, hey, what would you like to see in an ideal law for Web3 and DAOs? And then we've worked to include those laws in a way that also conforms to international standards so that we and the DAOs don't get in trouble, by doing this. One of the things I'm really excited to talk about is MIDAO is the legal entity the ICPCC DAO is actually using. And we're also already working with other SNS DAOs in the ICP ecosystem. MIDAO and it's the DAO LLC we've created allows a DAO to be truly decentralized. And obviously ICP is a very modern blockchain. It's maybe more advanced than many of the others that are out there. It allows organizations to be truly decentralized, to operate without a board, without a management team. We're excited to be part of an ecosystem where people truly want to be decentralized. They really want the DAO to be in control on-chain and off-chain. So if you're going to join a DAO and you want to make sure that it is properly registered, and I'd say not just properly registered, but it has considered the legal and regulatory implications of its work, you should just ask the question. Look for documentation. Is there some kind of founding document? Whether it's registered or not, is there a constitution? Is there an operating agreement in the case of a DAO LLC? Are there certified documents that are stamped by a government? Just by asking those questions, you can make sure that the DAO that you're joining, that the people there, maybe the leaders there, if there are leaders, are paying attention to these issues. And if you join a DAO where no one's even realized that it's important to look at regulatory risks, maybe you're the one that can bring that to the table for them. So if anyone is interested in getting started with MIDAO or learning more, I want to also announce that we're offering two things. One is a 10% discount to anyone in the ICP ecosystem on our registration fee. And two is actually a 10% referral reward to the ICPCC DAO for helping get us connected with the ecosystem. And so if you're interested in learning more, you can either reach out to ICPCC and they can make a referral, or reach out to us directly. You can find me on Farcaster if you're into Farcaster, at The Thriller, Twitter, I'm 0xThriller, or you can just find MIDAO at MIDAO.org and just mention ICP when you're filling out the form or when you reach out to us to make sure that you get that discount. Really excited to be part of the ecosystem. I should mention I do have a podcast of my own called Just DAO It, the podcast for people starting DAOs. You can find it on any major podcast platform. I always interview DAO founders. We'll be talking to ICPCC on the show shortly as well. We ask some questions about what it's like starting a DAO, leading a DAO. What are the challenges you run into? What are your favorite tools, favorite DAOs to check out? If you're into DAOs, it's a great show to check out. And again, especially if you're on Farcaster, I encourage you to track me down at The Thriller, reach out, say you saw this talk, and I'd love to connect with you there.